this book must be reckoned with by all who would build a firm foundation for the future of the United States. For my own part, I do not feel that this book is the last word, but it is a start and a mighty good start in helping all those who truly love the soil to fight the good fight. Unbelievable. And I just want to show you one more time how big this book is. Two things.
Climate change. We've never faced a greater threat. Yet all that we produce and consume inflates the debt of greenhouse gases we release. We feel them raise the temp, and the tempest we'll unleash will leave us weeping to forget, unless we take collective action, make a pledge to finally change our ways and keep climate change in check, to benefit the planet and all of its inhabitants. We know it can be done, so listen up and join the quest.
And climate change demands that we change everything that we do.
Hello everyone, this is Chad Frischman, and I'm on a quest to find the most impactful solutions that not only help to solve climate change, but move humanity closer to a regenerative future. Climate change is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. And this is not an alien attack or a monster from the deep seas, it's a crisis of our own making. Nearly everything we do as a species, everything our economy produces and consumes, emits greenhouse gases that are warming the planet and causing catastrophic climate change. And climate change impacts everything else, from increasing poverty and food scarcity to climate refugees, devastating biodiversity loss, and destruction to ecosystems and human systems that we're only beginning to glimpse of today. So, we have to change everything. And this is where it gets interesting. If we have to change everything, then it can be the great opportunity to build a better future by design, a regenerative future that benefits humanity and the planet. Welcome to Chad's Climate Quest, where we will be talking to some planetary-grade thinkers and doers who are pouring their energy, wisdom, and intellect to solving this great challenge in ways that benefit all.
Chad's Climate Quest is brought to you by RegenIntel, activating humanity to become a planet-positive species. Find out more at www.regenintel.earth. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce a truly visionary leader in the climate and sustainability space, Marc Buckley. Marc is a regenerative futurist, ecological economist, and global food systems reformist who has dedicated over 3 decades to creating sustainable and regenerative systems worldwide. He's been at the forefront of shaping global policy. He's a board member of the Dubai Future Foundation, chair of the UNFCCC Innovation Hub, and the host of the widely respected Inside Ideas podcast. Marc's passion for creating a regenerative future has made him one of the leading voices in the global sustainability movement. And I'm honored to have him here with us today. Hi, Marc. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you for coming along my climate quest.
Thank you so much, Chad. It's good to see you and lovely to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, Marc. I'm a big fan for many years. And you're one of these guys, Marc, that I feel you're on the stages all over the world. And every time I'm at any event, I feel like I turn around and there you are, whether that's about to jump on for a keynote talk or at a climate march. Remember, you were there and we tapped me on the shoulder and there you were. Where are you calling in from today, Marc?
Today I'm in Hamburg, Germany. I'm actually in my home in Hamburg, which is rare this year. I've only been home 45 days out of the entire year. So I just finished my 239th event, and it was the Cali COP16.
Wow, over 200 events this year?
Yeah, it's almost 4 to 5 a week. Yep.
That is impressive. That is really, really impressive. Well, I'm glad you're able to be settled for a little bit in Hamburg and rest and regenerate. Marc, you've been on this journey towards sustainable systems for decades now. And, you might even say that you are one of the OGs, the original gangsters of sustainability. What sparked your initial passion for sustainability and regeneration? And how has your path evolved to focus on these areas?
I appreciate you answering that, asking that. I'm not the original OG. I actually came in this in a totally different way. I have to say I wasn't struck by lightning. I haven't seen the climate god. I'm not a climate refugee, so I don't have any pivotal moment or story to tell you. It was a gradual shaping over time where the lights kept getting brighter and I could no longer turn them off. I could no longer say, I'm not seeing this. I don't believe in this. It's not real. It was the questions of who is taking us in the right direction? How are we going into the future properly and in the right way? And was surrounded by great mentors and leaders that helped me along this journey. First and foremost, my family. So my family was big in the outdoors. We went camping and fishing and enjoyed hiking in nature quite a bit. My father's from America. My mother's from Germany. My mother was also a translator for the United Nations and did a lot with travel around the world, spoke 6 languages. And so I was just fortunate at a young age through these campings. My father always said, pack out more than you pack in, and follow the golden rule. Leave the people and planet better than you found them. So treat them as you would like to be treated. That golden rule. And it really stuck with me. You know, I did Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, and I just liked the outdoors. I was kind of a feral kid where I was outside a lot, just enjoying nature. And then later, as I grew up, I wanted to do the jobs or experience things that to me seemed fun. And so I was a river guide, a ski instructor, a tour guide in nature. And so that really helped. And then as I got older, I studied from the second father of ecological economics, Herman Daly at the University of Maryland. And then I studied with Dr. Fritz Holf Capra, Professor Dr. Fritz Holf Capra of the Capra courses in systems science, and William McDonough, Bill McDonough, who is the father of the circular economy and cradle to cradle and upcycling, sustainable architect, is a good friend and mentor of mine. And he guided me on a lot of my TED Talks and a lot of my help. And he was the designer with his company for one of my production facilities close to Hamburg, so the Aloha's Eco Center. And I've just been fortunate enough to have good friends, mentors, and people show me the way. I was one of the first 50 people trained by Al Gore in his ranch in Carthage, Tennessee, as a climate speaker and leader, and just had those opportunities. And I wouldn't say it's all fortunate, because in some respects, I sought these people out through my experiences in nature, through what I learned from my family. I was on a quest as well, just like you, Chad, to find people who thought the way that I did, who saw the world in a different way, and were looking or had solutions to live a better life, to live in a different way than the world was currently going. Because when I took many times over the years the systems of the way the world was going, I was very dissatisfied with the future hope of where the trajectories where we were going. And so that's why I sought these people out.
Well, I mean, it's amazing. And I appreciate that you recognize the mentors along your way. And you might say that you're not one of the OGs of sustainability. And I respect that humbleness and modesty there. And you're bringing up Will McDonough and, of course, Bucky and so many other folks that have probably influenced you along the way. But, you know, you have attended every COP, which is the Conference of Parties for Solving Climate Change, since COP1 in Berlin. That's a lot of COP. So we can say at least you've been doing this for decades. And that's really an accomplishment. And so over these years that you've been going to all of these COPs, what changes have you seen in the climate dialogue over the years? And how optimistic are you that the global community is really on the right track?
I'm optimistic, but I'm not sure the global community, or at least even in the climate spaces, is 100% right on the track. Attending COP1 was really interesting because Angelica Merkel, who was the chancellor of Germany for many years, she was the environmental minister at that time. And I think it was Helmut Schmidt was the president at the time, or the chancellor at that time, over Germany for that very first COP. And it was a volatile time. It was also a crazy fun time as far as parties and wall coming down and all sorts of transitional things that were bubbling to the surface that were moving in that direction. So there was a lot of interesting things going on. But it was new. There was, back then, there was a lot of unease and unrest around climate. The discussion of how and the terminology we used was not quite there, and everybody was in this discovery mode. And I wasn't attending in the same aspect as I do now. I was more truly like an observer and a watcher and trying to learn and figure out what all this meant and not only find my voice, but to make sense of all the chaos of these. If you know COPs today, it's two weeks long. It's 200 country delegations and non-party delegations that have pavilions in the blue zone, and they're all speaking 8 to 12 hours a day, besides the plenaries, besides the general assemblies where they're negotiating certain topics for the climate. It's sheer madness. It's chaos. There's so many voices and things going on at the same time. It's hard to find your way. And so it's extremely different. I would say my biggest hope and optimism came from COP21. The interesting thing about COP21 was the signing of the Paris Agreement, and the Sustainable Development Goals came out September 24th, just shortly before the COP. And it was really interesting because there were so many things that were trying to derail that process. If you remember, Al Gore was doing his 24 hours of reality climate broadcast that he does almost every year around climate. And then the terrorist attack in Paris happened. And so he stopped the broadcast, and everybody thought that the COP wasn't going to happen. But then it did go through, and they upped the security. They went through with it, and it was a momentous event. And one thing that I don't think very many people understood and grasped is it was such a momentous event. It was the first time in human history that 197 countries came together for the first time ever and agreed on a roadmap, a plan of action for our future until December 31st, 2030 on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement to keep us at 1.5 degrees of warming. That's unheard of. If you know anything about COPs and delegations and politicians, it's hard enough for two of them to decide where they're going to eat lunch, let alone 197 agree on anything. And so it was a momentous time in history. And so that really gave me a lot of hope. And then shortly thereafter, I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto for the United Nations and presented that vision of the future, what that world would feel and look like if we achieved all the Sustainable Development Goals by December 31st, 2030. So that's the kind of optimism. As far as today, I just came from COP16 in Cali, Colombia, and guess what? I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful to see that was a pivotal biodiversity conference. Jakob Trollbuck has designed a new, he's from the new division. He designed a new logo for the biodiversity COP, and he also did the SDGs, and he also did the inner development goal logos. And they're all coming together, the inner, the outer, and then this biodiversity, and that's right in the middle. And it's this really plan and action, targets, goals, indicators, and roadmap on how to get to better futures. I like the regenerative future as well, but I'd like to put the plural on there because I think there's many beautiful possibilities for regenerative futures on this biodiverse world that we could have. And they're also kind of raising the bar in a better world, but it's kind of these plural futures for us all.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I mean, it's, there's not one future that we have to be on. I think there's a marker on the horizon. That horizon point is where we want to go for sure. But how we get to there, there's many pathways. And so if we name that as a regenerative futures, there are many pathways to get there. But that sort of North Star on the horizon point, we know we need to get to, right? But it also seems like these COPs for you were very much a lot of that aha moments. I mean, you said it was a progression where the lights got, successively brighter for you. And I call that the aha moment where you're, there's enough that something clicks and it becomes duh, right? It's the duh factor after that. You can't see things in a different way. So maybe that was part of your experience going to all of these COPs. You've really evolved into this brighter, be able to imagine this brighter future. And I want to ask you about that, like the aspect of imagination, because you talked about this, like how you can, imagine what the world would look like for everybody if we were to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And I want to see if maybe you can paint a picture for us of using that imagination now that the lights are so bright for Marc Buckley after all of these years of growing and evolving and learning. What does that future look like for you, or futures look like for you? What's the landscape?
Gladly, I appreciate you asking it. So it's really funny. Over the years, also, there's a lot of us lack a vision, and if you want to build a ship, you don't send the men to gather wood and give them plans on how to build a ship. You teach them to yearn for the vastness of the open sea and the adventures and the beauty that they can experience in that journey, and what it will do and affect on them. And what I do is a couple social experiments. First of all, I ask people to just briefly close their eyes, and I don't like to do this very often, as I'm not a big woo-woo person. I'm very based in science and facts, but I ask them to just close for a few seconds their eyes and imagine their home, what it looks like, what it feels like to them. Does it evoke any images in their mind? And maybe if there's smells, maybe if there's noises. And when they have that image in their mind, I ask them to open their eyes again of their home. And then I show an image of the blue marble, the second catalog image of our earth, the blue marble. And I say, how many of you had this image in your mind? It's sad, Chad, because less than 0.001%, and I've been to many, many events over the years, have raised their hand and said they envision that image. And that's a big, huge problem, because we're not all on the same page of our common home. Now, when I've went deeper into that question, I've asked people, what did you envision? And some say, I envisioned my farmhouse. I envisioned living in a camper. I envisioned living in an apartment, a condo, a big city in New York, in Brooklyn or the Bronx. And I imagined this, or countryside out in Utah or wherever that they envisioned. And they says, I saw my cat or my dog, and I saw my kids, or I saw my dinner table. I saw that I decorate with hardwoods. Maybe Chad would envision how you've decorated your place and what's surrounded in your environment. And we all decorate our homes differently. But I think you and I would decorate our homes also very differently from each other. But that doesn't make us different in that respect, or that we're not on the common home. It's just that how can we move forward with that for this common vision? And that decorating of our homes, or how we live, that's what we call development, or that's what we call the lived environment. And so that affects our world quite a bit, and how we see it and what we do and how we impact our world. And so it's really good to have that common vision. So then I took it even a step further, and I did the social experiment where I asked 3,800 people now on video the question, what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And that's an old Buckminster Fuller question that he asked and also wrote about in his book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And he also played the world game and the peace game inside the 1967 Montreal World's Fair, where he built a geodesic dome, and then also played that game, asking people to kind of play a game. What does a world that works for everyone look like for them? And as I asked people this question, this 3,800 plus people, mind-blowing. It was a crazy experiment. My initial idea was, okay, I'm going to get 50 people. I'm going to do a compilation video of these 50 people, and this is going to be such a great video, and I'm going to put it out on social media, and everybody will know, and all our problems will be solved. We'll go off into this utopia, optimistic future. As I asked people, only 7 out of the 3,800 people had an answer that was kind of similar. That was a big problem. The majority, I thought I needed to call an ambulance. They started to stutter. They started to sweat. I thought some of them were going to have a grand mal seizure. Eyes were rolling back in their head, and they got nervous. Some said, oh, can you ask me later? And they'd give some answer, and you could tell they were thinking about it when they were answering. And then when they got done, they'd say, can I do it again? Can I tell you again? I said, sure, let's record it. And so sometimes over weeks, months, years, they'd come back and say, hey, can I tell you again, what does my world that works for everyone look like for me? And I'd record it, and every time it was different. Now, I promise you, Chad, that's okay. If you don't know the answer to that question, it's totally fine. But I promise you, if you don't know that answer to that question and you're not okay with the way that the world is going, I promise you, some leader, some politician, some priest, some grandpa, grandma, father, mother, husband, wife, partner, spouse has jumped into that position into your life. A mayor, governor, whatever it is, has jumped into that position. Says, oh, don't worry. I know what a world that works for everyone looks like for me, and I'm going to guide you on that future. And as I travel around the world, all different countries and rules and laws and places and governance, I haven't encountered one place where I say, this is the utopia. This is the place where they're going in that future, and I'm fully happy with that. There's some pretty beautiful places and some nice places, but not really 100% where I say, yeah, this is the future, a world that works for everyone. And so if that's not the case, it's important for you to know the answer to that question so that you can then divest your money, divest your time, divest your vote, and put your efforts and try to live that future that you see and envision and the way you would like it to go. And through that process, you also get educated, you get empowered, you learn things about how the world works and how to create your destiny, follow your passion, follow your why and purpose for existing, and also align that with the way you want to live, the work you do, the way you earn your living on this earth and create value on this planet. And I think when those two harmonize, that is just a fabulous thing. And just to quickly wrap up, at the end, I did one more extra on that social experiment. I put it into ChatGPT. I was an early beta user. So I put it in there and I says, oh, this is be interesting. Put it in there, and guess what? Immediately gave me the answer. It was close to the correct answer from Buckminster Fuller, and which is to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or disadvantage of anyone. And then it even went on even more beautifully to succinctly put us into action. And I said, this is unbelievable. I knew it immediately. And so I said, can it even get better? Can it even get finer? So I hit the refresh button or regenerate button, which is my favorite button. It's regenerate and it's green. And so I hit that and it was the same answer. And I said, this is broken. Checked my internet connection, hit it again. I hit it 120 times, Chad. And every time it came back with the exact same answer. I thought something's wrong. So I had people in other countries, other states, around the world check, and it was always the same answer. Now, that was on the earlier versions of ChatGPT back when it was just starting to roll out. But how in the heck does ChatGPT know that answer when we are feeding it with our data, our books, our models? We're teaching it. We're giving it our language and our models and what we've done to train that. How can it know it, but 3,800 plus human beings not know it? Did we domesticate technology or did it domesticate us? I thought we were domesticating and training it, and it knows But for somehow we weren't taught that, we didn't discover that, and we don't know. And that was a perplexing moment of where, wow, that's very interesting. And it ties into, how I see the world and regenerative development moving forward. But I hope that, I'm sorry, my long answer, but that's kind of to answer that question.
I love this story, Mark. And, we've had a couple conversations around this, and I find it absolutely fascinating that ChatGPT came up after 120 times of regenerate. Also, my favorite button as well, and ChatGPT, that it came out with that same answer. And it strikes me that this insight that you've had about that sort of how is it that ChatGPT, being fed and learning from all of the data, the books, and knowledge that were in the public domain, can come up with an answer and we can't? And what that's, for me, that almost feels like a disconnect with our lived experience with what we actually know. So our data and our book and our knowledge systems are there in place, and the solutions are right in front of us. The solutions of how we create that regenerative futures, how we create and solve for climate change and sustainability and move beyond to a regenerative model. It's there. We know what to do. We have the data, we have the knowledge, we have the information, but the disconnect doesn't come in the knowledge base. It comes in how we're applying it and how we're actually, I think, living that experience, our experience of life. And I'm wondering where do we get to align, or how can we align our experiential, mindset to connect with that knowledge and database?
I'm glad you asked, and just to clarify, because I've also had this. There was many talks where I would get to the part and tell about the ChatGPT, and immediately I'd see people in the audience on their iPhone. They had ChatGPT on there and they put it in. And for many years, as I've done this for 8 years now, the answer was still the same. The latest models, and even Claude and Gemini and the newer versions of ChatGPT, they still have a similar answer, but they go into even more detail and it's more fine. So it has changed, but it's not a different answer. It's just even more fine how to get into action, just for that. But exactly what you're saying is where we want to go and fine tune it. And I think it goes and it kind of nudges us towards development or sustainable development and into that direction. And I want to explain a few things. And if you think I'm off base or I'm not answering your question, please bring me back so that we can come back to this. But I think this is the core of where we want to go. So in the United Nations, World Economic Forum, World Government Summit, EU, there's a lot of discussion about development, and since 2015, tons around sustainable development. And the question is what is development? A lot of people will say, oh, well, that's a charity, or it's underdeveloped countries, and it's trying to help them get the basic needs and stuff. Development is very simple. One, it's one of the world's largest economies. In that 15-year period from December 2015 to December 2030, the same period of time of sustainable development goals, that 15-year period, regular development is an $89 trillion US economy. It's one of the world's biggest economies. And not only is it an economy, development is the built environment. It's infrastructure, residential, commercial, hospitals, highways, roads, sanitation, water, electricity. It's how we live. It's the built environment. And that just regular development in the UN, we call that the high carbon scenario way of developing. We use high materials, high resource materials, lots of energy. We usually also have death of people in the construction of buildings. It's very inefficient, and we build up these very expensive things, business as usual, kind of like we've done it since the Industrial Revolution, and it's a high carbon scenario. We emit lots of greenhouse gases and carbons, methane and many other things in that process. But it's very simply, it's how we live. It's the built environment. It's how we live. It's our infrastructure and homes, residential, commercial. And when they get old, they get worn down, or that we just tear them down and build a new one, that high carbon scenario. So now when I talk about the sustainable development goals or the SDGs or sustainable development, people tend to say, oh, that's a Klaus Schwab conspiracy theory. That's some new world order, some craziness. No, it's not. It's the same thing as regular development. It's just a little bit better. It's not perfect. It's not the silver bullet. It's not the total solution. It's just saying we want a step in one direction, a little bit better in sustainable development. What does that mean? One, it's also an economy, but it's an ecological economic model. It's an ecological economy, and it also has a dollar value. It's 94 trillion US dollars, so about 5 trillion more than the 89, so 5 trillion more. And it's an ecological economic model, but it's the low carbon scenario. It's circular economy, it's LEEDs, it's BREEAM, it's Green Building Council, U.S. Green Building Council. It's the German high standard of building, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für nachhaltiges Bau, so the German green sustainable standard. It means better materials, more hemp, more less fossil fuels, more circular economy thinking, better architects, better way of building. But it is the same thing. It's how we want to live. Do we want to live a little bit cleaner? Do we want to live with clean water and sanitation, roads, infrastructure, hospitals and schools, and all those things? So it's just a little step in the right direction, but it gives us exponentially enormous steps to put us in a better position in the future, and also springboard off into other development models that are even way better than sustainability. Sustainability is just kind of sustaining the usual a little bit better and kind of keeping us at that point. We don't want to live that way. We want to live much better and more abundant in the future. And so we need to be thinking even further than that. And so that's really the answer to that question of that sustainable development. But that ties right into that whole thing that you're asking is like, why don't we know the answer to that question? Why do we think it? Everything in our life, I mention development in a different way. I call it evolution. Do you want to live in a cave without lights and running water and sanitation? Or do you want to live a little bit better? Do you want to decorate your house nicer? Do you want to have renewable energy when there's blackouts on the grid, or when there's bad things in the pipe and you don't have clean water, or you don't have it at all? Do you want to kind of have something that's always going to be available for you all the time, and really create a nice way to decorate your home and live? One last thing that I want to say around development. This is a big thing that I don't know if you've ever heard, and most people haven't heard. In the world today, at 8+ billion people on our planet, there's this section of children. We call them the early learners. It's kindergarten, preschool, first grade, second grade, and third grade. Those 5 grades of the early learners just getting into the school system. That's a part of infrastructure and development. Around the world today, we would need to build 63,000 classrooms every single week, 63,000 classrooms, just to meet the demands of those early learners coming into the beginnings of school. I want to tell you, around the world today, we don't even build 100 classrooms a month globally around the world. And so that's just one aspect of development that is not keeping pace with a living world, with an exponentially growing world, with society and civilizations. I live in Hamburg, and it's pretty nice, but I'll tell you what, the buildings are not passive homes. The infrastructure is not keeping pace with the community. And I live in a pretty developed place, but around the world, many are so far behind that they're not keeping pace. Now, development doesn't mean to westernize everything, to make it capitalistic and to really bring down the quality of life. It's just to deliver the basic needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to every human being on earth, and to do it in a way that is nice lived environment. Does that answer your question a little bit? I know it's not the shortest answer, but
Mark,
I think
this is
it
why I
ties.
love you. I love our conversations. There's so many directions to take this. I had about 20 questions that popped into my brain as you had that answer. And I think, it did answer the question to a certain extent, but I want to go back to that original question I asked, because everything you just said really on point. And again, there's a whole bunch of directions I want to take that. But going back to the original question, is it like we know what to do? The ChatGPT knows what to do, right? We put it in there, or these large language models tell us that based on the knowledge systems that we have and the data, but there's still that disconnect. And you made a really important point, is how do we want to live? And I think that's the fundamental question. How do we want to live? The overwhelming narrative in our system today is not aligned with that not aligned with the data of what we actually need. So we want to create a sustainable world. We want to create a regenerative world, right? But how do we help people, or how do people themselves come to the realization that that is how they want to live? Because I don't think right now the vast majority of people somehow are not thinking in terms of how I want to live in a sustainable way. I want to live in a regenerative world. They're not equipped necessarily to imagine what that future can look like, and how to match what our knowledge base is telling us where we should go. If that makes sense. That's where I want to get to. How do we get people to see, or how do people come to that realization that that's how they want to live? And what's the barriers that preventing them from seeing that?
At least 6 things that come to mind immediately when you say that, and I totally agree with you, is how do we get people to that point? Sadly, the biggest factors are the Brexits, the pandemics, the Bolsonaros, the Putins, the Trumpocalypses, all those negative things that happen in our world. Shine a microscope or a telescope, so to say, on our problems, and they really bring them to light. And that's when people say, boy, this world's not working for me anymore. It doesn't feel comfortable. I'm not meeting the basics, or it's such a struggle. Life shouldn't be like this. And then they start to look, and that it's not only an awe moment, but it's a shift in consciousness, a raise in awareness, and they begin to search. And those moments, although horrific and people die and there's lots of frustrations, those are moments where people are faced with kind of pushing their existing model of their life, or what they see around the world, out into the future, and say, boy, if it goes on like this for another 10, 20, 30 years, this is just not, is this worth being here? Is this great? So that's one thing that kind of makes that shift. The other thing is kind of tied to that first one, is we have that knowledge, we have that information for decades and centuries, we've had it. But then every time where we're on the cusp of reaching and making that decision or going in that, something comes along to derail us. And I know this is very impromptu, but I want to do it real quick, because I think this will hit the point home the hardest. I want to show you this book. It's called Soils and Men. It's a green book. You can see it's old and tattered. Mm-hmm. It's 1938, Soils and Men. It's the Yearbook of Agriculture, 1938. It's old. It's an original edition. It's signed. I've even got it signed here. Wow. and dated October 10th, I think, October 10th, 1938. But in this book, and I do a lot with farming and in agriculture and regeneration. This book, believe it or not, talks about regeneration. Wow. And it talks about models. But I want to just read just one little thing in here. It's the foreword. It says, the earth is the mother of us all, plants, animals, and men. The phosphorus and calcium of the earth build our skeletons and nervous systems. Everything else our bodies need except for air, sun, comes from the earth. Nature treats the earth kindly. Men treat her harshly. He overplows the croplands, overgrazes the pasture lands, and overcuts the timber. He destroys millions of acres completely. He pours fertility year after year into the cities, which in turn pour what they don't use down the sewers into the rivers and the oceans. The flood problem, insofar as it is man-made, is chiefly the result of overplowing, overgrazing, and overcutting of timber. This terribly destructive process is excusable in a young civilization. It is not excusable in the United States in the year 1938. We know what can be done, and we are beginning to do it. As individuals, we are beginning to do the necessary things. As a nation, we are beginning to do them. The public is waking up, and just in time. In another 30 years, it might have been too late. The social lesson of soil waste is that no man has the right to destroy soil, even if he does it in fee simple. The soil requires the duty of man, which we have been slow to recognize. In this book, the effort is made to discover man's debt and duty to soil. The scientists examine the soil problem from every possible angle. This book must be reckoned with by all who would build a firm foundation for the future of the United States. For my own part, I do not feel that this book is the last word, but it is a start and a mighty good start in helping all those who truly love the soil to fight the good fight.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And I just want to show you one more time how big this book is. Two things.
Wow.
First of all, probably nobody ever read it because it's biblical in proportion. And back then they read more because it probably didn't have as much TV and internet and all the things, obviously. But I don't think they read it. And the second thing is 1939 was World War II. Mm-hmm. And the farming, the agriculture went into the war machine. In that book, they talk about cover crops, topsoil, regeneration. They talk about the importance of soil. And I want you to know throughout human history, and this is what I said before I read that, when I told you about COP21, the terrorist attack before, when I talked to you about the Brexit, when I talked to you about the pandemic, there is something when we're on the path, we have the information. 1938, we've got the information right there. Something comes along and it tries to derail us. And so the only way not to get derailed, and the way we started out this podcast is actually amazing because we talked about the lights going on and I could no longer shut the door or turn off the lights. I just knew and there was no turning it off. When you find your why, your purpose, when you find your answer to what does a world that works for everyone look like for you, there's no shutting off that lights. There's no one holding you back. Say, oh, I want you to live in a slum, or I want you to live out without clean water and sanitation. I want you to live without energy. There's nobody telling you that anymore. You say, I don't want to live like that. I want to have a bright future. And I'm a father and a grandfather. And so what I do is I think a lot about just as a young person, regardless of sustainability, regardless of development, I think, I want all my kids to have their own room. I want my grandkids to have their own room. I want to be able to let them do this and have a place to play. I want to put a swing set in the back. How do you want to live? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. How do you want to live now and well into the future to have a good life? And for me, that's not just development. It's evolution. It's how we learn. It's how we feed our minds. It's how we go. And it's that process of regeneration. For me, I couldn't do for 32 years now, travel and go to all these events if I didn't practice regeneration. For me, it's not a yearly thing. It's a daily thing. I practice regeneration to regenerate my body, food. You probably see me drinking during the podcast. I eat right. I drink right. I think right, and I regenerate my body every day. And then I also have chunks of the seasons of our earth, 4 distinct seasons where I also do processes, intermittent fasting, and read books like these biblical books from 1938 to find out what went wrong in civilization, what went wrong. And so I promise you, if you find your why, your purpose for existing, your answer that question, what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? Those lights just keep getting brighter because you're discovering that information. It's not somebody like Mark telling you. You find the books, you find the people who've written it out there. All I'm doing is just say, hey, I read this book. You should read it too. You should read Giles Hutchins' book, Nature Works, or Leading by Nature, or Regenerative Leadership. You should read The Drawdown from Chad and Paul Hawken and those books that tell us what are the steps, what can we do to give us the help, because apparently our school systems, our infrastructure is not keeping pace to make sure that we get that information, that we get those books in our hand, the videos in our hand, the podcasts in our hand that say, I know you're frustrated. You really need this information now so that you can live the life your soul intended you to live the way you would desire to live in a regenerative future.
Absolutely. Beautifully said, Mark. And I think what you're touching upon here is so important. We know what to do, but there's a disconnect. How do we get more of those lights getting brighter? How do we get more of those aha moments for people? And there is that sort of, I love that the way you phrase that, finding your own, the purpose for your life and what that world can look like, where it works for everybody. How we lead and help people, steward and guide people on that pathway is about education. It's about creating communication, right? Communication, education. It's about creating media that is meaningful, but also accessible, meaningful, relevant to people as they make their day-to-day decisions about regenerating their own body, regenerating their community, their family, and in the institutions that they're operating in. And so I think that education component is so fundamental, and how we're educating too. So you mentioned the education systems being broken, and I think that in many ways that is true, and across the world that's true. And so how we are creating content, how we're creating assets and that can be used to communicate that the new different ways of thinking and mindset shifts is so key. And yet we're also on the same token being inundated with media, communications, advertising, marketing from the other side that's want to perpetuate the system. And we know that's the case, right? We want to stand for something, but we also have to, when we're standing for something and we're looking at that common purpose, we have to look and say, okay, here's what we're standing against. And I think how we are crafting this education, how we're crafting this communication, we need to do much more. We need to do a lot more of this to combat the other side, right? Because the fossil fuel industry, take that for example, they have the money, the resources to be able to fund a marketing advertising campaign to keep the status quo. We need those kind of resources to help every individual, like you say, find their purpose, get those lights brighter and brighter that they can't turn away and think differently, normalize solutions, normalize sustainability, which seems so basic. How do we, avoid the worst case scenarios of the system we're operating in within our planetary boundaries? And then regeneration seems so obvious. How do we go beyond sustainability to regeneration? I think it's all about education, all about communication, and creating ways in which people can access that meaningful understanding of how they want to live in a better future for all. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really powerful. And I want to kind of flip the script a little bit, because there's so many more questions in what you've presented that I want to raise. One of those being that you were such an integral part in creating and shaping and understanding the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You wrote a manifesto shortly thereafter. And yet the SDGs, as you pointed out, are an imperfect framework. I know that. I said long ago, we have to go beyond climate, beyond sustainability, towards regeneration. I want to hear from you, how you see the transition from sustainable to regenerative development playing out on the global stage.
So I not only did the manifesto, but because of that, I was seen as a futurist within the UNFCCC. And so then I was asked in 2019 by the UNFCCC Secretariat of the United Nations for the Climate Change Conferences to come in and start the next set of workshops and beginning of the goals that come after the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was a program that we started in Songdo, Korea at the National Adaptation Program Expo, which is a UN conference where all the countries come and deliver their adaptation and mitigation plans, what they've achieved and what their plans are for the future. And they do that every year. And so we did a 5-day moonshot workshop that went from thinking wise from 2030 to 2050, what are the next set of goals that come after? When I went into that, and the way that meeting occurred is I wrote a book that I've got here, right here. It's called Moonshots for Europe, and I wrote it with Future IO Institute. You know Harold Neidhart as well. We started the Future IO Institute and part of the faculty there. But I wrote a section in that book, and it was with the rest of the faculty in the book. And I gave that to my colleague, Claribel Pujol at the United Nations, who then gave it to Yusuf Nassif, who then gave it to the Secretariat of the United Nations and says, we'd like you to use this moonshot thinking and future literacy labs, UNESCO, Future IO Institute, and those to come to Songdo, give us a 5-day workshop on creating the goals that come after the SDGs. And so we went to Songdo, Korea and did that, created the 8 pillars framework under the Resilience Frontiers. And now since COP25, and then we turned it over in November of 2019 to all interagencies of the UN. And it's basically the framework of the resilient development goals. And so I want to tell you what happened in that process of doing that is I wanted Regeneration to be part of that because it was 200 country delegations there doing multiple ideations and iterations, and they were under the UNFCCC Adaptation and Mitigation Office. They were in that mindset of resilience, and they would not go any further. And also what we saw in that process is that when I did that visioning, when I did that moonshot with them, their moonshots weren't to 2030 to 2050. They were actually things that were already existing today, but they were kind of behind that infrastructural education aspect, which we just got done talking about. But I really wanted to have regeneration come in there. I also spoke about symbiosis at that same 5-day workshop that we did. We had a professor out of Japan that talked about homo symbiose, which is a form of regeneration in the new of the homos hominid kind of gene that maybe we could evolve even to, the symbiotic earth and symbiotic planet that moves more towards that regeneration. But these politicians and delegates just could not figure it out. So we went with the resilient development goals. We created 8 pathways, and now there's resilience hubs or resilience labs, and all this talk about resilience. Just to clarify, so people who are on the call, if you have sustainability, does not mean you have any resilience. If you have some resilience, that means you have probably good sustainability and some resilience, but there's certain types of resilience. There's the inner resilience for mental, physical abuse and psychological abuse, that you have the resilience to bounce back. And then there's the dystopian resilience where we're still living and existing, but because of the environment around us, we need a gas mask, oxygen mask, or a spacesuit to still resiliently survive on Earth. It's very dystopian, gray, or we're fighting over resources. Or there's the resilient, desirable futures where we have infrastructural things in place with resilient development that the day after a storm, a natural catastrophe, a war, or something, we have renewable energy, battery backups, water systems, and the basic needs to bounce back and live and to quickly restore and regenerate, have food, things like that. And that was the direction they took. I want you to know that with regeneration, not only do you have resilience, you also have sustainability. It's ingrained, embedded, and it's also the way that the world has worked for 3 3.8 billion years. The way we emerged on the scene, the way life on Earth emerged on the scene is regeneration, symbiosis, cooperation, collaboration, and this regenerative process that's 3.8 billion years old. It's the model of the way the world has always worked, will always work. And if we kind of mimic that, if we harness that and adapt that into where we're going, that's really will be a big factor. And so now I think this is something that you and I and many others should be doing and moving towards is let's present something that lets the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the Ministry of the Future, the World Government Summit, and the whole world make a leapfrog from where we are today, six years left or 5 years left on sustainable development. Let's just leapfrog into regenerative development goals or just into regenerative development, a new regenerative way to rejuvenate, renew, restore our Earth to where it needs to be in developmental processes of how we live, the built environment, that evolution of how we want to live in pace with our world that's growing into the future. And I think that's such a vital thing. One little nudge or caveat in there, and I'll always have these because they're so complex, is that like the Sustainable Development Goals, we were presented with them in the wrong way, very linear and lateral, bubblegum colors, 1 to 17. Most people don't know who they're for or what they're for. They're a system. They're very systemic. So you can't work on one SDG and not touch on all the others. That was a big mistake how we presented them to the world. The other big mistake is I told you earlier in the call that it's to do the Sustainable Development Goal way, the sustainable development is $94 trillion US dollars. The other big mistake is we didn't explain to people that we're going to spend $89 trillion regardless on regular development. And that's only $5 trillion more to do it the right way with much better outcomes. And so all they say is there's a gap and where we're going to get the money. Show me the money. I feel like I'm watching Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. That's all it is. And the thing is we knew up front how much money was needed. We got that data from the World Bank, from historical of how we've developed before, and many other data sets. We ran out hundreds of thousands of scenarios for the Sustainable Development Goals through systems dynamic modeling. The thing that we didn't do is to say, we know it's 94 trillion, so let's just round it up to 100 trillion and let's create the Sustainable Development Goal Bank or the Sustainable Development Bank, or let's put a new department under the World Bank or the Asia Development Bank that each of them have a Sustainable Development Office. They have the money that's needed to get us there. And the way we give that money out is we have projects and people and builders and architects come and say, oh, yeah, here, I meet this certification. I meet this standard for sustainable development. Here's the project. It ticks all the boxes for sustainable development at the standards that you set. Here's my architectural plans, engineering plans. William McDonough even sign off on it. There you go. Give me the money. That's how it should work. And so with the regenerative development goals that I think we should present, we should also not only present a standard of what that looks like in the built environment, how do you regenerate and develop the world to that those different futures, cultures, place all around the world so that it's everywhere at that standard. And then also make sure we have that trillion dollar amount and create a regenerative development bank that can fund it based on those projects and those people who submit those architectural plans. That brings up the caveat of if we look around the world today at all the William McDonoughs, all the Fosters and Partners, the Biagi Ingels, the Biggs, and all the development and architectural and engineering companies around the world who are right now could do regenerative development projects for the built environment around the world, we couldn't do it. because there's a small handful.
That's
We
true.
need 1 million of those who are trained, educated, the education that you discussed about, to be able to build that world. So that's new job creation, new economic creation, new architects, new engineers, new built environment standard, so that it's there and it's ready to go, and so that we have people ready that can meet those standards. Because if you want to do regenerative development today, and I work on several regenerative development projects around the world, not only is money, where's the money, or show me the money, the big question. The second question is, we have to comply to outdated HUD and PUD and development standards. They say we can build this regenerative community or this building, but they say we need 15 parking spots for that. They say we need to use natural gas or fossil fuels to do this, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to have that in our community, but the laws and the regulation, the policy, the built environment standard currently is in the dark ages, is in the Middle Ages, in the Industrial Revolution. It's not fit for a living system, a world that's living and moving forward. And so this is very hopeful. Don't say doom and gloom. Just think of the immense job creations. Just think of the immense economic creations, ecological economies that can create these jobs of the future that are fun and enjoyable. And that ties into what I told you before is, this that one aspect of finding your why, your purpose for existing, and knowing what a world that works for everyone looks like. The reason we come into conflict is there's 86% job dissatisfaction on our planet today. That means there's somebody who may have a purpose and a vision for themselves, but they work or do something for a company or an organization that they're totally misaligned with. And with that misalignment, the way we live and the way we work, there is no work-life balance. They're all one. And so we need to not only find our own why, but we need to reform those organizations or regenerate them to be future fit, to be ready to say, oh, we're perfectly aligned. This is happy harmony, and we're all moving into this regenerative future. So those two go together hand in hand. And I think that's a formula for really this regenerative future, because for me, regeneration means to create the conditions that are conducive to life, to thrive and flourish amid ever-changing life conditions. And we do that by the way we live, by the way we evolve, that we regenerate and restore the earth and have that abundance.
Thank you, Mark, for that. And I share that definition. And of course, I really appreciate you bringing up the regenerative development goals. I can't agree with you more. In fact, it's one of the core pillars and the mission, the purpose, our purpose at Regenerative Intelligence is to help create the regenerative development goals. And I recall, back in when I gave my TED talk around drawdown, I ended with the line, we need new global goals to go beyond climate, beyond sustainability to regeneration. And that first got me on that kick that we really do need to think beyond that 2030 framework and to create the regenerative development goals as a collective. And so I want to invite you and we continue to this collaboration between us so that and many others so that we can really create that as a real living document. And I think that's part of the key, the challenge I think with the SDGs framework is that it's not a living framework. It's something that seems to be very constructed, as you described. And I think it's also it's systemic, and which is important, but it's also not grounded in real specific solutions. And I think, when we're looking at the regenerative development as a conceptual framework, I think it's important to identify what it is we mean by regeneration and regenerative, as you described one definition of there. But it's also important to really name what the specific technologies, practices, behavior changes are, and to create goals and targets that are aligned with achieving these very specific solutions, but also weaving in the capacity to evolve, change like a living system. And what are the new solutions that are going to come along through innovation, but always grounded in that core definition. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I'm linking arms with you always so that we can do this together. We're actually planning to write a book around regenerative development and development goals for next year, and want to invite you as a co-author. It's going to be a whole group of us working together on it. So really think it's so important to create that as a framework and then go to the UN. And I think that was the other point that for me really resonated. And that was, looking at the institutions themselves. Are they fit? Are they future fit? Are they future fit to help be to nurture that regenerative future into existence? And then to help maintain that and to grow that. And steward that there. And I want to question that, because you've worked with the United Nations so much. You've worked with World Economic Forum. You mentioned the World Bank and other large institutions and organizations that, we have to be honest, are often affiliated with the perpetuation of the system and status quo. So do you believe these institutions really have the power and the will to drive real system change? And why aren't they doing it?
The answer is no, and it's real easy. And it's sad. So since Antonio Guterres came in, they've been in a reformation, not only internal things, then they've also faced the pandemic and things. There's a lot of internal training around the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of it happened, some of it didn't because of the pandemic. And again, there's always something that happens in the natural world or in the real world that derails us when we get our eye on the prize, to quit looking at that. And so that's this year. We had in New York the Summit of the Future. The reason was that is because they're not future fit, and they need to think about the future. What's the summit, and what's this a common agenda moving forward? And with that Resilience Frontiers program, we had Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote the Ministry of the Future. They're also creating the Ministry of the Future within the UN out of Geneva, and making it kind of like a sub-ministry under the United Nations, trying to think more about that future. So they're trying right now. They're failing miserably. They're also divided in classes, and they need a lot of help. Where I'm very excited and stoked about is this regenerative movement, specifically in agriculture, has raised hundreds of millions of petitions, and people working on lots of acres and hectares around the world to regenerate and restore it in a farming way. And they've signed some big petitions that they presented to the U.S. Congress and to different places around the world. I think if we come up with something very in that same direction, a regenerative development book, and with very specifics kind of in line with the drawdown and things that you've worked on, moving forward like that, presented along with that with the signatures and petitions, maybe using global citizens and that to get 500 million people to sign off on that. That's the future that they want. And also that very simple, we need to also get something that's very simple, like a manifesto or a declaration that's easy for people to understand, that resonates with them. And when they say, what does a world that works for everyone look like for me? It's kind of in that line that people can get on board easy and say, yep, I would sign up for that. That future is the future I want to work towards. And then how that works individually, specifically for us with our cultures and where we live around the world, that fine tuning comes with the specific innovations and those things under that core framework of what we understand that regenerative development is. And so I truly think something in that direction with a book, with the experts who have been working there and do that, can make a big change to also maybe even place a regenerative development agency right within the UN that has voting powers and powers to do things as well. Because in our world today, in a world that's changing exponentially, if you only improve incrementally, you will fall behind exponentially. So I'll just say it again. In a world that is changing exponentially, if you improve only incrementally, you will fall behind exponentially. And our world is changing every single day. Our life on Earth, since we've crawled out of that primordial soup. It's been a very exponential time here and impact on our world. And so the time is no longer for the 30th and the 31st COP and the 16th and the 17th COP for biodiversity. We're talking things ad nauseum, and we're debating about the wrong things. And then as we get close and as we come together, World War II, Brexit, pandemic, Trumpocalypse, something derails us. And so time is of the essence that we get these things in place to shift that world and never let our world get below a certain standard of living for each and every one of us, a world that really works for everyone. Because as long as one person on this earth is suffering, we will all suffer.
Thank you, Marc. There are so many more questions, discussions, comments we can have in this conversation. And I want to actually take this as a time to invite you to come back to another podcast in the future. I really would love to have a second follow-up here because we're out of time. We're past time, actually. So let's do this again. Let's have another deeper, even more deep discussion and answer all the other questions I have in my brain and continue the discussion.
Gladly, anytime.
But one more thing for today. And I ask this of all of my guests, Marc. So I would like, if you can, to describe to me your vision, describe what it looks like of a regenerative future, and what is your role in creating?
I want to empower billions, all 8+ billion global citizens on our planet to live an adaptive lifestyle of health and sustainability within the safe operating systems or safe operating systems of our planetary boundaries. And I want to do that through changing our infrastructures and the way we live, through regenerative development, regenerative agriculture, through speaking, through doing podcasts, doing videos, and joining with all the other regenerators and human beings on our earth to build that beautiful future. Because I know that we're all crew members of this spaceship Earth. None of us are passengers, and even little babies and the elderly have a role to play. And I'd like us all to regenerate for that beautiful, abundant future of the world. I know that we can make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or disadvantage of anyone. And that, for me, is Seva. It's an old Sanskrit word which means selfless service to life. And that's why I'm here. I don't have a boss. I don't make tons of money, but I'm here to be of selfless service to really help us regenerate this planet. Because it's when you do, there's plenty of food, plenty of clean air, plenty of abundance, and it's just a beautiful life. That's proof is in the pudding when I attend events with you and we're come together. They're always fabulous events and we have a good time and we also resonate and are in awe of each other. I learn from you and we learn from each other.
Marc, it is such a joy. And it's always, and that's so important, weaving that joy into the work that we do. And every time we have this opportunity to be together, it's a joy for me, a pleasure to have you on my climate quest today. Your journey, your insights have been so enlightening, and it's an honor to be able to host you and to learn from you and to share as a community, this collective purpose and a common purpose and collective vision for many regenerative futures. And I'm sure our listeners are going to be just as energized and motivated as I am and carry this inspiration forward with them today. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Thank you so much, Chad. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for this episode of Chad's Climate Quest. Stay tuned for our next episode when we'll be talking to another planetary-grade thinker and doer implementing solutions to create a regenerative future. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm thrilled to welcome you on my Climate Quest.
This podcast is brought to you by RegenIntel, a public benefit advisory and education platform training the next generation of leadership for a better planet, and co-produced and distributed by our incredible partners, Better Worlds, Soar Studios, and Shikonomy. Special thanks to Michael Katijian, aka Inverse K,
for the incredible intro number for Season 3 of this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. And to learn more about RegenIntel, check out our Foundations program at www.regenintel.earth/education. Applications are accepted all year round. See you next time on Chat's Climate Quest.